You are listening to the Keeping It Juicy podcast.
Your main squeeze in nutrition.
Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon on YouTube so you can get notified every Tuesday when we upload a new episode.
You can also add us on Facebook and Instagram at Keeping It Juicy Podcast. Hey guys, welcome to episode 28. We're going to be talking all about female and sports nutrition, but before we do go into that, let's talk about the new nutrition in the news. So basically, we're going to bring it up again. So Tess Holiday. So fat or fit? Fat and fit, actually. So if you remember from our earlier episode, we did talk about Tess Holiday and the body positivity movement. Well, Tess Holiday is back at it again and is on the cover of Cosmo magazine claiming that she is fit and fat, strong, fit, and 300 pounds. Her Instagram caption also even says, "Just remember that your size isn't an indicator of what you are capable of, and if anyone tries to tell you otherwise, just sit on them."
If I were 300 pounds, I don't think I would be going around bragging that I would sit on people, but that's just me. So she says that size isn't an indicator of what you're capable of, but I'd really like to see her do some pull-ups or run a 5K. So if her size clearly isn't an indicator of what she's capable of, then why isn't she doing these things? Yes, she's working out, and that's what this article talks about, but
being fit is a little bit different. That's a whole, I mean, you can be fit and fat, but I mean, I don't want to go too much into that. That just, being fit basically describes your physical capabilities, and I'm not 100% certain what hers are.
right.
But I feel like being 300 pounds, she would have more of a significant barrier to get to such goals.
Well, even just the physical barrier that excess body fat provides, you can't really do a proper squat position if you have a big gut touching your knees. I hate to say it, but your body cannot physically do the movements properly when excess body fat are getting in the way.
I mean, I feel like she still does physical activity, and I guess fit is still it's used very loosely. There is a definition for it, but it's also used as a general term too. So I feel like she is fit, in her definition, that she is fit, right, and that she is able to do a lot of their exercises. But I mean, everybody's idea of fit is also different.
Fit is a very objective term, and there's definitely a spectrum, and fitness is a very individualized journey. Right. What I do for fitness is totally different than what anyone else considers fit in their mind. And that's fine. If she considers herself in her current position as fit, that's fine. But I will highly disagree that her weight is an indicator of what she's capable of. She cannot do certain things because of weight.
She can't, but that doesn't mean she'll always.
Of course.
Keep working towards it. So.
Of course, exactly. Just because she's not capable today doesn't mean she can't be capable in 6 months from now. And I definitely don't want anyone to feel like that's what I'm saying, deterring her from continuing on this process. But has millions of followers saying, "Oh, weight is not an indicator of what you're capable of." Well, maybe a little bit.
Yeah. I don't know. We'll see. But at least I'm glad she's putting out a positive, basically input into the world of more than just eating hamburgers or other stuff like that, and that
right.
She's putting out that message that overall health is important.
Yeah, she's definitely changed her content to shift a little bit more to health type things versus,
Right.
you know, her sitting on a bed eating cotton candy.
Right.
At least it's not that type of content anymore. But we're making progress. Making progress.
Anyways, so let's move on to the actual content of our episode, which is basically females and sports nutrition. We're not going to go too much into the sports nutrition. We're going to kind of go into the nitty gritty of a lot of the things that is not really talked about in the female sports world. So, for example, I'm just going to start off with what is the female athlete triad syndrome. So there is something called the female athlete triad, and this is a combination of 3 conditions that are connected with over-exercising in athletic training. Again, it says athletic training, but I feel like it can apply to individuals of different, like you don't have to be a collegiate athlete.
Right, you don't need to be on a sports team or something like that. Just physical activity, I guess.
I guess.
Yeah.
Just excessive exercising in athletic training.
Right. Because I was just going to say, you know, over exercising can apply to that cardio bunny that goes to the gym all the time. And although she's not on a team or something, she's an over exerciser.
Right. So. And this is something to be careful of. And a lot of the symptoms do include amenorrhea, so that's the abnormal absence of menstruation of women, and disordered eating, and osteoporosis. So those 3 factors do make up the female athlete triads syndrome. Help me.
Yeah. So we're going to deep dive into some of the facts about amenorrhea, disordered eating, and osteoporosis. So first, amenorrhea, so loss of the menstrual cycle. So of sports and like women who emphasize like the aesthetic and leanness, so think ballet, runners, even, you know, female bodybuilders, you know, where they put a strong emphasis on how you look and how lean you are. The prevalence of secondary amenorrhea can be as high as 69%. And to put that in comparison, the general population only sees secondary amenorrhea at 2 to 5%. So this is an issue. You know, women losing their menstrual cycle when they are training for sport is a huge, huge common issue. And it's not supposed, like, women are not supposed to lose their cycle. It's not healthy for women to lose their cycle.
Right. It's even prevalent in the bodybuilding industry as well.
I'm part of that statistic. So, and I wasn't even that extreme on the spectrum of things. I'm surprised I did, but it just goes to show, like, when you cut weight like that, you're going to lose it. Like, not everyone, you can get to a lean body fat percentage and not necessarily lose your menstrual cycle. I have talked to a handful of female bodybuilders who have not lost it. But I also think that could be partially genetic. It could just be they got lucky. But then I also know a handful who lost it and haven't gotten it back yet. So don't bank on, a few people don't lose it and they get to 10% body fat. I'm not going to lose it either. Chances are 69% that you might lose it. So don't bank on that, you know, I don't know, other percent that don't lose it. Right. So menstrual dysfunction in female athletes does include a wide variety of disorders. So the most common one is, again, amenorrhea, and this is basically just when you lose your period for 3 months or more. There are other classifications of amenorrhea, but it's usually like starting your cycle late as a young athlete, so like a teenager, and then other ones include like just gaps in your development, but for female athletes, it's specifically losing your menstrual cycle. So this type of amenorrhea is actually called FHA, and this stands for functional hypothalamic amenorrhea. So basically this is characterized by an absence of the menstrual cycle And this is due to the suppression of the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. So basically how these organs interact with each other. So your hypothalamus, pituitary, and ovaries, there's a feedback loop system and how all of these organs interact with each other. If they're not interacting properly, it will cause amenorrhea and just disruptances in your menstrual cycle. So again, this type of amenorrhea is associated with exercising and stress and is most common to the female athlete. Again, 69% of female athletes suffer from this.
So on top of that, you do go into that disordered eating part of that female athlete triad. So disordered eating do include a range of irregular eating behaviors that do not necessarily meet the criteria for severe disorders such as anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa. And both of these are very common in the athletic community as well. So up to 70% of elite athletes competing in weight class sports specifically, actually in both male and female, are dieting and have some type of disordered eating pattern with the goal to reduce that weight before competition. So this energy availability is the amount of dietary energy for all physiological functions after accounting for energy expenditure from exercise. Low energy availability may be the result of an eating disorder, but can also occur in the absence of a psychiatric diagnosis such as anorexia or bulimia. There are some studies that have found that athletes often lack the appetite necessary to promote food intake as compensation for energy expenditure from very intense exercise regimens. And female athletes are at risk of developing these eating disorders due to pressure to maintain a low body weight, especially along with poor guidance about nutrition and weight loss from the athletic community. So many people actually place the blame on the coach, who often fails to teach athletes about healthy dieting or cultivates an environment in which weight loss is encouraged, regardless of the methods employed to actually attain it. Which is why I say always having a dietitian nearby always helps out.
Yeah, I will say, even just from my brief experience in the bodybuilding world, I heard some horror stories of just people eating, and these are like pros. Like, these are people who are well known in this industry, at least in San Diego, and they are eating 7,000 calories in one evening and throwing up, and then spending 3 hours in the gym the next day on the treadmill or Stairmaster or whatever. Like, and I look at them, and what's crazy is, like, we put these people on like a pedestal as the epiphany of health, when in reality, 70% of them have some sort of disordered eating pattern, and 69% of them don't have their menstrual cycle. Like, they're not the epiphany of health. They're actually pretty unhealthy. So just some food for thought. And then we do want to dive into actual eating disorders and how that kind of varies from disordered eating. So again, eating disorders are a diagnosable condition. So first, I'm going to go into kind of the criteria for anorexia. So this is when your body weight is less than 85% of the expected weight for your height and age. So severely tiny, very, very tiny. And these people have an intense fear of gaining weight or becoming fat, and they definitely have a disturbed body image. So they don't see themselves as what they truly are. They think they're fat, even though they're extremely tiny. So again, they have amenorrhea, so they have lost their menstrual cycle for at least 3 consecutive months. And then the different types can either be restrictive. So most of us think of anorexia as they're very careful with, like, they weigh and measure everything. So that's more so restrictive. But anorexia can also be binge eating and purging. So eating a ton and then not eating again for a very long time.
Right. And then the next one that is really classified is bulimia nervosa, and that's basically recurrent episodes of actually binge eating. So this can be like continuous inappropriate attempts to compensate for overeating to prevent weight gain. This can include vomiting, laxatives, diuretics, other medications, fasting, and excessive exercise. Binge eating and related behaviors occurring at least twice a week or more for about 3 months can also be classified as bulimia nervosa. And the perception of self-worth is excessively influenced by body weight and their shape. So there's actually two types of bulimia, if you didn't gather that from now. There's the purging kind, and then the non-purging, which would include the laxatives and diuretics and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also important to point out, someone can be diagnosed with anorexia and purge as well, but the main difference is the body weight thing. Mm-hmm. So somebody can be of normal body weight and still be diagnosed with bulimia. It's more so anorexia is the body weight thing, less than 85% of the expected weight for height and age and whatnot. Someone who looks completely normal from the outside can still have bulimia.
Right.
I think that's important to point out. And then just disordered eating is kind of everything else. It doesn't really meet any of that specific criteria of weight or frequency of specific behaviors. Also, it can or cannot include anorexia, like slight anorexia, or it could or could not include like normal menstruation. You could be in your normal weight class, but you could also have lost significant weight. It's just kind of everything else. Some of these classifications could be repeatedly chewing and spitting out food. That's another behavior. Mm-hmm. It could be some binge eating with behaviors that try to get rid of it, so laxatives or purging, but not that specific criteria of like a certain amount of times per week. So it's kind of that everything else category.
Actually, you saying the chewing and spitting of food actually reminds me of our diet episode. I forgot. But yeah. That was one of the diets, is chewing and spitting out the food.
Yeah.
So watch out. They could actually say it on a diet instead.
Well, history does tend to repeat itself, so we will see. Right. And I do want to say too, this whole disordered eating umbrella, most of us have gone through some phase of disordered eating in our lives for some reason or another, whether we are going on a vacation and we really want to like get skinny for it, or we went through a really tough time in our lives and we overeat. So any like kind of unhealthy relationship with food can be considered disordered eating as well. Like I feel like we all naturally kind of go through these phases of we're super on it and then we kind of get more relaxed with it. None of us are on it all of the time.
Right.
So
right. And if it's anything more serious, we like something as complicated as disordered eating, we do kind of tend to ask for help from the psychiatric point of view, not just dietitian point of view as well, because it's such a multifaceted thing to really talk about. Yeah,
eating disorders are just as much of a psychological thing as a nutritional thing. If not, the psyche needs to be addressed first, because there's something's going on, and you've got to get to that underlying issue before nutrition can be even considered.
So let's dive into the third portion of the female triad, which completes it all, and that is osteoporosis. So if you guys don't know osteoporosis, basically it's kind of like, how, God damn it, let me look for a proper definition before I pull that out of my ass. So it is like they do have pores and they do become more fragile, and the bones do become weak and brittle as a result of it. So with osteoporosis, new bone creation doesn't actually keep up with the old bone removal. So that's important to note, especially as athletes. You want to make sure you have strong bones, but with osteoporosis, you're a lot more likely to have breakage. And so the prevalence of osteopenia ranges from 22 to as much as 50% in female athletes with osteoporosis spanning from 0 to 13%. This compares to the 12 and 2.3% prevalence reported in the average population, respectively. So the greatest amount of bone mass happens during puberty, the greatest amount that you do accumulate. So maximal increases in bone mass accrual occur typically between ages 11 and 14 in girls. So generally, young, healthy women achieve 92% of their total body mineral content by 18 years of age and approximately 99% by age 26 years. Ooh, I'm almost there. Anyways,
I'm there.
I guess
this is what I got.
just all goes downhill.
All goes downhill from here.
So bone loss does occur later on with menopause and aging just naturally, but that's just how it goes.
So as she said, the bone we have right now, we stop kind of accruing more, I guess, at a certain age, and it does just kind of all go downhill. But we can definitely preserve as much as we have. It's just the age that we stop is like debatable, but with age it goes down. But in young athletes with female athlete triad, the age at which you actually start seeing it go down happens a lot sooner. Just for multiple different reasons. So
that's going to lead to a lot more fractures and cause increased injuries in the actual sport itself.
Exactly. So as she mentioned before, our bones are constantly building up and breaking down. So this is called bone turnover. And again, it's a constant process of bone formation. And the matrix development is built by osteoblast, and the breakdown is by osteoclast. So we're taking it way back to anatomy if you guys took that. So having decreased energy availability and loss of menstrual cycle affects your hormones, and it affects your energy intake. So that in and of itself disrupts the process of bone turnover. So what ends up happening is you're breaking down more than you're able to build back up. So you're always kind of stuck in the negative. So high impact physical activity does increase bone density. So it has been shown that high impact exercise in pre-pubertal children can actually increase your bone density by 4 to 5%. So that is good to hear. We do know that weight-bearing exercise does increase bone density, but after a certain point, when your energy availability and your menstrual cycle is gone, again, there's less bone being made than being taken away.
Right.
So you're, again, stuck in the negative. So in female athletes who have lost their menstrual cycle, they actually have 10 to 20% less lumbar spine bone mineral density than female athletes who do still have their menstrual cycle. So 10 to 20% less bone mineral density is a lot.
Yeah, that's very significant.
Yeah, and we unfortunately don't have like the specific age range for that. We got these facts from a review study. But imagine having 10 to 20% less bone mineral density at the age of 30. Imagine what that female is going to be like at the age of 75. Like, she's going to be screwed over. Like, that sucks. Like, age is already working against us. So, even at a young age, to have even 5% less is not a good thing. So the main reason this happens, again, going back to loss of menstrual cycle, so estrogen normally inhibits osteoclasts. Remember, osteoclasts are the things that break down bone. Osteoblasts build the bone. So estrogen blocks the osteoclasts, which are breaking down the bone. This results in the osteoclasts working to like their full capacity, meaning that they're breaking down like a shit ton of bone. So.
Science.
Facts.
So considering all these information that you know, so loss of period, you already have the disordered eating, you already have the osteoporosis going on. So what are the complications for this? So first off, menstrual dysfunction can lead to infertility due to the lack of ovarian follicular development and ovulation or luteal phase defects. Alternatively, in some young women that recover from the triad while menses are being restored, premature ovulation may occur and result in unexpected pregnancy in the absence of contraception. Weird, I know. There are also negative consequences associated with hypoestrogenism. So low levels of estrogen can cause endothelial dysfunction resulting in cardiovascular disease. So
Another thing on the list.
Women with hypoestrogenism have elevated basically LDL cholesterol levels. So that's the bad cholesterol levels. And women with the triad also have decreased immune function and impaired skeletal muscle oxidative metabolism. So that's a whole lot of fun stuff that also happens.
Yeah. So if it wasn't already obvious, athletes who do suffer from osteoporosis will see more stress fractures, and the most common site is in the tibia, and fractures of the tibia actually account for 25 to 63% of all stress fractures. Also, menstrual irregularity will increase the risk for injury, and these athletes do have a 2 to 4 times greater chance of getting a stress fracture than women who do have their menstrual cycle. So disordered eating, which is associated with low energy availability, does have some very serious issues associated with it, including depression, low self-esteem, and different anxiety disorders. This can be a very slippery slope, which could lead to more severe eating disorders.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention the body image issues that come along with that.
Yeah, that's tough. That stuff is tough to get over.
Right. So with that note, let's go into what can we consider as treatment for this female athlete triad. There is still a lot of debate about the best method of treatment for female athletes with this specific condition. So basically a multidisciplinary approach, as we mentioned before, is usually necessary for the recovery of this condition. So support from a primary care and or sports physician, as well as a dietitian, psychiatrist, or therapist, the team coach, and family members is extremely important throughout the rehabilitation process overall. So the primary goal of treatment is the restoration of regular menstrual cycling and the enhancement of bone mineral density. The first step in usually attaining these goals is to modify the diet and exercise regimen to increase overall energy availability. So basically reduce the energy expenditure and maximize the intake. Athletes may need to increase the energy availability to at least 30 calories per kilogram of fat-free mass per day to resume that menses cycle that they should be getting.
That they had lost, probably due to decreased energy availability. And the thing is, increasing food consumption is
very tricky.
So challenging. Yeah, it's really hard for athletes who have starved themselves for months, possibly years of their life. You know, think gymnasts and ballet and cheerleaders and bodybuilders, like they're honest, like sometimes they're scared of food,
right?
And it's hard.
That's why this treatment really does consider the approach of a very multidisciplinary type of approach, basically.
Yeah, and leading on to the next point, there currently is like the best approach is actually prevention versus curing female athlete triad. So preventing it is the best way to not get it. And basically just participation in regular physical exams are a good way to screen for signs and symptoms. But as with like eating disorders, sometimes it's really hard to tell the difference. They're kind of good at hiding signs and symptoms. So it's important to just be very mindful, like just be very attentive to patterns and whatnot. So any athlete that presents one component of the triad should actually be evaluated for the other two. So if they've lost their menstrual cycle, get their bone mineral density checked and check how many like calories and energy availability, what's going on there. Right. So clinicians should screen for cardinal signs of the triad. So this is a recent decline in performance, any changes in mood, drastic weight loss, frequent injury, particularly fractures, obviously. So healthcare professionals, as well as coaches on the team and athletic administrators, should aim to educate athletes on this female athlete triad and teach them how to optimize their energy availability and bone health to prevent injury. And open lines of communication are very essential, and it's helpful in recognizing the problem early so the intervention can actually happen before the consequences are just irreversible. So obviously, this is very hard to diagnose, because where does the line between determination and disorder really fall?
It's very tricky.
Because we see these athletes and we're like, wow, they're so determined. Like they seem to be in tunnel vision on their sport. And it's like, well, maybe they've got something bigger going on. But
there's a lot of stuff behind the covers.
Oh yeah. It's true with the bodybuilding world too. Like they're on this pedestal, like epiphany of health, and they're not. Like they're just not.
It's just not. So yeah, just message us and comment below and just let us know your thoughts and comments on the female athlete triad and what you really think about it, and if you've come across somebody that's experienced it.
Definitely.
So with that being said, social media shout out of the week, it goes out to future adopted ODN 209. And he is a master's graduate student, and he is also a dietetic intern, and he is also a certified dietetic manager, and he's listening all the way from California. So thank you so much.
Thank you for listening, and thank you for your support. It definitely does not go unnoticed. So if you want to be our next social media shout out, just remember to like, comment, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
So, all right. Thank you guys for listening. We hope you enjoyed this, and we will catch you in the next one.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the Keeping It Juicy podcast.
Your main squeeze in nutrition.
Don't forget to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for a brand new episode.
Also, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Keeping It Juicy Podcast.
We'd love to hear from you, so please leave us a review.
5 stars, no less.
On whatever platform you're listening to, or send us an email at keepingitjuicypodcast@gmail.com.
Or if you have any topics you'd like for us to touch upon, shoot us an email. Until next time, don't do anything that I wouldn't do.